Well, it's a few minutes past 9. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Looks like we got a little bit of a light crowd. Thanks for everybody to join this morning. For those that did, my name is Dave Biedenbach. I am the regional director for the Small Business Development Center, my office out of Ames. I'll talk a little bit more about SBDC, but I'm going to go ahead and just get started with, with the agenda. So I was asked by the Council of Governments, Region 6, to provide some background and some information about some of the programs that came out of the CARES Act and then the other bill that came out at the end of the December. The three things that primarily are that the SBA is involved in as far as business recovery efforts are the Paycheck Protection Program, the EIDL program or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and the Debt Relief Program. And I'm going to go into detail on each one of those programs just to get everybody familiar about what those are all involved. So I want to first start out, let's talk a little bit about who SBDC is. So the Small Business Development Centers was created back in 1981. We're a nonprofit organization. We have about 1,000 offices across the country. There's 15 here in the state of Iowa. So I have 14 counterparts, and each one of those offices are affiliated with either a university or a community college. And basically what we do is we just help with economic development efforts across the state. And we do that by providing one-on-one counseling services for people that are looking to start a business, looking at growing their business, or in some cases, potentially transitioning into or out of a business. So either buying or selling a business. We do that by providing, again, startup assistance, business planning. We help with marketing research and strategies, operational strategies, financial planning. And then again, we help businesses that are looking to buy or sell businesses. So we are funded primarily by the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, and that's kind of why we're touching on some of the programs that they're offering today. So I'll start with the Paycheck Protection Program. The SBA has had a long-standing program called the 7A Loan Guarantee Program, and what that is it provides banks with a level of security, and primarily through a guarantee that if a business cannot service a loan, that the SBA will step in and provide a guarantee and basically help at least partially provide some funding back to the bank for that program. So the Paycheck Protection Program is it is a 7A loan guarantee. So what that means is that the business works directly with the lender, and then the lender works with SBA on that loan guarantee. What happened with the CARES Act is the PPP is what a lot of people refer it to. It basically expands that 7A program. So the people that are eligible, the individual or businesses that are eligible, are those small businesses, and the SBA has a definition of that. So pretty much any business under 500 employees are eligible for these kind of programs. What the CARES Act did is it expanded beyond just small for-profit businesses. It expanded into ag. So farm businesses are now included, at least to be eligible for the PPP program. And it also included nonprofit organizations. And I kind of listed what those nonprofit organizations are. And again, so the 7A program that's been around forever, typically the farming businesses and nonprofits are not eligible, but with the CARES Act, they are now eligible for this program. It is a loan. So again, part of the CARES Act is it provided a very low interest on that loan, so 1%, and that's fixed. It is a term loan, so it's a 5-year program. It was 2-year when they first introduced it back last spring, but they changed that to a 5-year right around June, beginning of June. The loan payments are actually do not start until the borrower applies for forgiveness, and I'll get into the forgiveness piece in just a bit. If they do not elect for that forgiveness, it does kick in. Those payments do kick in after 10 months after the cover period. And again, I'll get into what the cover period means. What's kind of neat about this program is that there's no collateral needed or any personal guarantees required. With this regular 7(a) program, again, that's been around forever, typically there is a collateral position that both the bank and the SBA require. But again, with the PPP program, that's not a requirement. And the good thing is that there's no fees that the bank or the SBA will charge the borrower. Typically, there is some kind of a underwriting fee that goes along with the 7(a) program. But with this PPP program, the borrowers don't have to pay any of those fees. The SBA does provide basically a reimbursement to the banks for doing the underwriting. So the banks do get a little bit of skin in the game. But what's nice about that is that the borrowers don't have to include any of those fees when they're looking at this loan. So the amount that businesses are eligible are based on 2.5 times the average monthly payroll. And, that's based on 2019 or 2020 payroll. So for instance, if your average payroll is $10,000 per month, you would be eligible for a $25,000 loan. For basically restaurants and bars, accommodations and food service, that's 3.5 times. So they would be eligible for those particular types of businesses. They'd be eligible for, in my example, $35,000. The maximum that you can borrow on this is $2 million. There's some restrictions about what those loan proceeds can be used for. Payroll. I mean, the primary reason that this program is put in place is to make sure that people or that businesses continue to keep their employees on their payroll. So a big chunk of the money needs to be used for payroll costs, and I'll get into that a little bit. It's about 60%. And when we say payroll costs, it's not just the salaries that you pay them, it's also the benefits and the payroll taxes, all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty comprehensive about what they mean by payroll costs. It also includes mortgage, interest, rent, utilities. And with the law that was passed in the end of December, they've added worker protection costs, as well as some property damage costs, uninsured property damage costs, and then certain supplier costs, which I think is kind of huge for a lot of businesses, because before, if you are a business that has any kind of inventory, those type of costs are now included as far as what you could use these loan proceeds for. Another thing that came up with the law that passed at the end of December is that it allows businesses that have received some kind of a PPP loan in 2020, to apply for another round of a loan. So if the loan that they received in 2020 was not enough to help them through this pandemic, with how it impacted their business, they can now apply for a second round, in what they call a second draw of this program. So, but again, there's some requirements that go along with that. If a business is looking at applying for that, obviously they have to have received some kind of a PPP loan in 2020. They have to have less than 300 employees, and they have to demonstrate that their business was impacted at least 25% of their revenue when you look at 2020 compared to 2019. So they look at comparable quarters. So they go, for instance, in the third quarter, I saw a 30% reduction in my revenue. My business would be eligible for applying for that loan, for that second draw. The loan application. So the law that passed in the end of December. So the original PPP expired. I think it was the end of September. They basically reopened this PPP program on January 11th, and businesses are now eligible to apply again for this program through March 31st for both the first and the second draw. Again, these loans are it's a 7(a) loan, and so businesses have to work through their lender, through a lender, an SBA certified lender to be exact, to apply for these programs. Most banks are an SBA certified lender, but for those people that are working with their bank that are not an SBA certified lender, there's a link that I've included on here that where you can do a lender match. So basically it's just helping businesses find SBA certified lenders if your bank that you typically work with is not a certified lender. There's a couple applications that I've provided links to here. One is for the first draw. So if a business has never applied for a PPP loan before, they would use that application form. If they're looking for a second draw, I've included that application form link on there as well. The lender is basically your point of contact if you decide to go ahead and apply. They're the ones that follow you through the entire process. The application, what documentation you need, which I'll get into in just a little bit here. But they're the point of contact. They would be the one that actually has the contact with SBA on this program. So a business would work again directly with their lender. If they have any questions or more documentation is needed, to all go through the lender. If a business applies for a loan and does not either get approved for the loan or they don't get it approved for enough of what they're looking for, they can't appeal that. And that again, that goes through the lender. The lender would work through with SBA on that appeal. What's really great about this program, which again, on a regular 7A type loan, is that there's opportunities for that loan to be forgiven. And then effectively it's a grant. So basically free money. So you don't have to pay them back. So there's obviously a lot of restrictions that go along with what you need to do in order for that loan to be forgiven. The biggest thing is that you need to maintain employee levels, both on headcount as well as what you pay those employees. So the total salary has to be at least 75%. So you need to pay at least 75% of what that employee was paid prior to the pandemic. And again, you just need to make sure that the headcounts remain the same. If those fall below those criteria, the amount of forgiveness is reduced proportionately. So the ability to apply for this forgiveness, at least for the first rounds, for those people that applied for a PPP loan in 2020, they had until the end of the year, basically December 31st, 2020, to apply for that forgiveness. For those people that are applying for PPPs, either the first draw or second draw, they basically, the SBA has not defined when that deadline is. What we've been telling businesses is that most likely you have until the covered period, the end of the covered period, to provide an application for forgiveness. And I'll get into the covered period here in just a second. Right here is the covered period. So basically, let's give an example. You get a $100,000 PPP loan. You have anywhere from 8 to 24 weeks to basically spend that $100,000 on those eligible costs. And again, that's payroll, that's the rent, that's utilities, supplier costs. So the $100,000 needs to be spent within that covered period in order to apply for any kind of forgiveness on that loan. At least 60% of those loan proceeds must be spent on payroll costs, and they're very strict about that. So for example, if you had a $100,000 loan, at least $60,000 of those loan proceeds must be spent on payroll costs in order for that loan to be forgiven. There's forms for applying for this loan forgiveness. I've kind of listed them here. It all depends on the size of loan, primarily on which form you use. They originally came out with one application for that loan forgiveness back in, I think, June of last year. They have since provided other forms based on, again, the size of loan. So for those loans, I believe it's under 50,000, they can use what they call a 3508 EZ loan forgiveness application. And there's very little documentation that a business needs to provide for those size of loans. When you get into the larger loan sizes, there's documentation that's required as far as that loan forgiveness application. Let's see. Yeah, again, the loan forgiveness, as far as the timeline that a business can apply for that, it's pretty much any time after the covered period that you can apply for that loan forgiveness. But if a business does not apply for that, the loan payments begin about 10 months after the end of the cover period. So if a business doesn't apply for a loan forgiveness, those loan payments automatically kick in about 10 months after the end of the covered period. I just listed here kind of the documentation that typically needs to be provided as part of that loan forgiveness application. Obviously, payroll. If you do payroll internally, excuse me, you basically just have to provide some documentation, whether that's payroll check stubs, whatever that is. But basically, you have to provide some kind of documentation that you actually did pay those employees and the amounts that you paid those employees. They also require some kind of the payroll tax filings that you have to do with the Internal Revenue Service as well as the state in Iowa Department of Revenue. And then there's the documentation that you need to provide for all those other costs. So again, rent, utilities, mortgage interest, that kind of stuff. Provide documentation that those expenses have been paid. And like I mentioned before, for those smaller loans, these kind of documents are not required, but for those larger loans, this kind of documentation is what the bank is going to need in order to apply for that forgiveness through the SBA. I just wanted to make note that again, that the lender is the business's primary point of contact as far as the loan application, the loan forgiveness. If the business doesn't get 100% of that loan forgiven, obviously they need to make payments on what has not been forgiven. And again, that's all being done directly with the lender. I wanted to point out too, as far as the federal income tax treatment. So last year, the Internal Revenue Service was typically a loan that's forgiven is considered taxable income. The IRS made a ruling last year that the loan forgiveness would not be taxable income, but the expenses that are paid from those loan proceeds would not be tax deductible. So there could be a double dipping. However, the law that passed at the end of December, they now allow both. So a business that gets a loan forgiveness, they don't have to include the amount of the loan that's forgiven as taxable income, and they can deduct those expenses that were used with those loan proceeds. So it's a great advantage for businesses as far as a tax perspective, is that you can, again, don't have to pay any taxes on the amount of loan that was forgiven, and you also can deduct those expenses. So I would talk to your tax professional if you have any questions about that. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. There's a thing called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. This is, again, a program that the SBA's had in place for many, many years. It was designed for basically physical disasters. So hurricanes, tornadoes, any kind of damage, physical damage that goes through. The derecho that came through last year, businesses could apply for this Economic Injury Disaster Loan. But the fact that the pandemic had a widespread impact on businesses, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan was basically opened up to any business to apply for. So what this does is that for those businesses that were impacted by some kind of disaster, in this case it was a pandemic, they could apply for this Economic Injury Disaster Loan. And it's basically intended to be used for working capital. So if you saw a dip in revenue that gets to a point where the business can't handle its expenses, then you would be eligible for this, what they call EIDL program. Again, these are intended for small businesses, so those businesses that have less than 500 employees. And it was only open for profit, but again, with the pandemic, they opened this up to nonprofit and ag businesses. So again, just another one of the CARES Act and the law that passed in December provided the expansion of this program to other organizations and entities out there. This is a term loan. So for businesses, for-profit businesses, the interest rate on this is 3.75%. For nonprofits, it's 2.75%. So relatively low interest rates. These are loans. There's a maximum maturity of 30 years. So these are very long-term loans, and it's really intended to help businesses work through that disaster and, basically help with cash flow. So the debt payments are relatively low at the beginning just because the term of the loans can be up to 30 years. Those loans can be repaid at any time without any kind of prepayment penalties. So it doesn't necessarily have to go the full 30 years, but businesses have the opportunity to pay it off at any time. There is a collateral requirement for these loans, for loans over $25,000, and a personal guarantee is required for loans over $200,000. So this loan is, I'll finish this here. So the payments are deferred for 1 year. So a business that does apply and get approved for an EIDL loan don't have to make any payments for 1 year. That's just automatic. The interest still does accrue during that 1 year, but again, for cash flow purposes, their intention there is to help businesses work through the disaster, get to a point where they can start making payments. But this is not a loan that could be forgiven. Again, that's just the PPP program that they have that forgiveness opportunity. So a couple examples of some programs that can help people through this weird time that we're going through right now. Kind of how they determine what the business would be eligible for is effectively they look at what's the working capital requirements for that business. And so roughly, they don't really provide any kind of calculations, just like the PPP program is the 2.5 times average monthly payroll. This one is kind of a little bit more ambiguous about how they calculate that. But basically what they're saying is that they look at a loan amount that would help a business work through about 6 months of working capital. So in their case, they're talking about revenue less cost of goods sold with a maximum of $2 million. And like I said, these loan proceeds, it's a little bit more open about what you can use these loan proceeds for. And they basically say for working capital. So any kind of debt payments or just normal operating expenses is what this can be used for. What these loan proceeds can't be used for is basically debt refinancing. So it can make loan payments, but it can't basically refinance an existing loan. It can't be to buy equipment. It can't be there to repair any kind of physical damages, any kind of distribution to owners. So that's dividends or any kind of owner distribution, a distribution to the owners. These loan proceeds can't be used for that. So there are some restrictions about what these loan proceeds can be used for. There was a thing that was introduced again new with the CARES Act, what they called an EIDL advance. And so what that was is that for those businesses, they needed immediate infusion of some kind of capital, some money, some funding. So the SBA provided up to $10,000 of effectively it's a grant right up front. So a business that applies for an EIDL program, it's basically they calculated that based on the number of employees. So it was $1,000 per employee up to $10,000. Unfortunately, that program was discontinued. They basically ran out of money, to be honest. And they did not reintroduce that with the law that passed at the end of December. So unfortunately, that program is not around anymore. However, they did provide what they call a targeted EIDL advance, which I'll get to here in just a second. The law that passed at the end of December, one thing that they introduced is that they provided an opportunity for businesses that received an EIDL loan in 2020 to again apply for an increase if need be. So that is basically based on what the working capital needs were for the business during 2020. The SBA determines what that amount is. The maximum increase that a business can apply for is $150,000. And they don't really have a very formal program about how to apply for that increase. So effectively what you have to do is provide an email or a letter to the SBA, and I provided an email address about that, and basically saying I need an increase on this EIDL program, and then somebody would from the SBA would reach back out to you to go through that process about applying for that increase. I provided a link here for the application for the COVID-19 EIDL program. If you don't want to apply online, you can apply basically through mail. So I provided a link to the actual paper form where you can complete and mail it, and I provided an address there. And then those applications, you can apply for this program through the end of this year. Provided a kind of a list of what documentations are going to be needed when you apply for this type of program. There's a couple formal forms that need to be filled out, IRS forms, and I've kind of listed the other things that are also needs to be included in that. The last thing I want to talk about is what's called the debt relief. So for those businesses that have existing SBA guaranteed loans, so again, those are 7A program as well as a 504. The 7A is working capital and some equipment. The 504 are basically for SBA guaranteed loans for real estate. And then there's another program called microloans. It's very, very small loans that businesses could apply for. What the SBA stepped up and did is that they provided some debt relief, i.e. the name of the program. So for 6 months, the SBA will pay for those debt payments. I don't believe there's a maximum on that. Actually, there is. There's I think it's a $9,000 per month maximum that the SBA would pay for. So they got to be pretty sizable loans to get $9,000 monthly payments. So these are, again, for 7A 504 microloans. These do not, this program anyway isn't applicable to the PPP or EIDL programs. So this program would not apply to the loan payments for PPP or EIDL. Let's see, treated, oh yeah. So those debt payments that the SBA provides, I just want to again talk a little bit about the tax treatment of that. That's basically a loan forgiveness. And so that is considered taxable income for this particular program. So if the SBA steps in and they make $1,000, your $1,000 debt payments each month for 6 months, that $6,000 over that period is considered taxable income. So I provided some links here again. So I wanted to step back and this, if you want to get a copy of this presentation, and again, probably the main reason to do it is that I provided quite a few links that businesses can tap into and learn a little bit more about these programs. So if you want this presentation, these slides, you can email me or you can provide it in the chat, your email address if you want. And I'll make sure that I email you the presentation if you want to. My email address I'll have at the end of this presentation, which I think is the next slide. Yep. So if you have any questions about the program, you can reach out to me directly. Sherry Benson is a business counselor that works with me. She works in the, she lives in Newton, but she primarily works with Marshalltown, Marshall County, Hardin County, Tama. So that part of the world, if you have any questions, you can reach out to Sherry as well. But feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. My email address is right there. So that's pretty much what I had today. I just wanted to do an overview of these programs, and I'll open it up to any questions that anybody might have.
Hi, Dave. Thanks.
Hi, Julie.
That was really helpful. And I am coming to you from the nonprofit world. So I'm with the community and work with a lot of nonprofits. Couple questions. Can you give me some examples of what supplier costs would be?
That's primarily your cost of goods. So, so if you're a retailer that, say you're a clothing retailer, you're buying inventory, obviously. So those loan proceeds can be used for the purchase of that inventory. The requirement there is that you had to have an existing relationship with that vendor. But that's basically it. So that's again something that's new that was introduced with the law that was passed the end of December, is that they add supplier costs as in addition to what those loan proceeds can be used for, and as part what could be part of the loan forgiveness calculation.
So now I'm going to put on my for-profit. So if I'm a restaurant and I buy food from Cisco every week, that could be included?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was huge. It was a big change because it was pretty restrictive about what those loan proceeds could be used for as far as forgiveness. It was restricted to basically rent, utilities, and that kind of stuff. And supplier card costs are obviously a big cost for businesses. So yeah, it was a great addition that they added with the law that passed in December.
Yeah, that's really huge. I'll share that with some people. Another And I work with a nonprofit, and they had some really strange revenue in 2020. They actually provided COVID individual assistance. So they had a lot of money pumped into their organization that went right back out to individuals. Is there any way to exclude that? Because overall, their income from their grants and stuff was lower. But when you look at strictly revenue, it was high because they took in these donations for individual assistance and then kicked them back out to individuals. Is there any wiggle room there, or is it strictly revenue?
You know, to be quite so, SBDC was set up to work with for-profit businesses. The nonprofit world is relatively new to the SBDC. So I'll note that question. I don't know if I can give you a right answer or not, because I don't know what they include as far as revenue from a nonprofit perspective.
Right.
I can do a little bit of research on that. And if you want to send me an email with that question, I'll make sure I get to the right people to get that answered. Will that work?
That would be great, because this particular organization stepped up and kind of took on stuff that they didn't typically do, but felt like they had got the first PPP loan and felt like they had the bandwidth and needed to pay back the community. And then now they're getting, you know, kind of sidewing because they did had a lot. I mean, I think it was probably $40,000 that went out for individual assistance. So really penalize them in that way, unfortunately. So yeah, I will email you with that question.
Great. Yep, I'll definitely look into that and get back to you. Any other questions? Julie, you have any questions? Mark, Joe?
I do not. Mine was more the nonprofit world, kind of revenue that's a little bit. I know that some had some capital campaigns too that really the revenue wasn't related to like what they do in their nonprofit. It was for a building, and kind of they could use the PPP definitely again, because they are not at 100% till right now.
Okay. Yeah. Again, the PPP program is great just because it's a low interest loan. So even if you wouldn't have the ability to get any kind of forgiveness, obviously that's the biggest benefit of that program. But it's also good that it's a 1%, relatively longer term. I mean, it's a 5-year note that people can take advantage of. So,
and for the for-profit world, could you remind me, bars and restaurants, they get 3.5 times their payroll this round? They can.
Yes. So basically, that just determines what the loan amount eligibility is for that business. Right. So for all other businesses, it's 2.5, but for basically accommodating restaurants and bars, that loan amount eligibility anyway is 3.5 times what the monthly average payroll is.
Great.
Yeah, that's a good
Not
thing.
that I don't eat and drink out a little bit.
Yeah, right.
Get a free glass of wine or something.
There you go. Well, if there is any other questions, again, if you want copies of this presentation, feel free to just email me. I appreciate everybody that did show up this morning. And anytime you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you. It was great. It was nice and straightforward.
Perfect.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Love it. Thank you.
Great. All right. Take care, everybody.